You've read at this point a good 1,500 books, haven't you? What would you say you've learned that is not well known, but absolutely should be?
Oh, that's a good question.
Greg Denning has spent the last 30 years researching what makes an exceptional life.
And has helped thousands of people around the world create extraordinary lives.
What I'm about to say can alter the course of your life for the better, or for the worse, actually. It's one of the most powerful messages out there, and it needs to be shared with everyone.
Greg Denning, welcome to the show. You've read at this point at least a good 1,500 books, haven't you?
Yep, somewhere around there.
When did you start reading them? How long has it been?
This is actually a really cool story. I struggled with reading. Reading was so hard for me. I was a very, very slow reader. I was sounding out every word, and it was just so slow. And my teachers told me I was behind reading levels. It was such a struggle, so I didn't like reading. But luckily, my older sister got into these romance books, and she started to read them out loud when we were little. We lived in this little teeny house in a tiny little basement. And each evening, my sister would read to us from these little romance books. And as these little kids, right, these little boys, we sat there listening to these books, and we got drawn into the story. And story is transformative. Story captures the human mind. And so I got drawn into the stories, and I loved it. I'm like, keep reading to us, and we'd finish a book. And I remember we'd always sit there crying when somebody died, or we'd just get into the stories. And so, I just keep reading. So she'd get another book and keep reading. And then she ended up moving out early. And I was left with this emptiness of, I loved stories. And I loved the habit of reading at night, which I still do, by the way. Now, almost 40 years later. And so I was torn between this inability to read well and this desire to have the stories. I didn't want to read. I just wanted the stories. And so then somebody gave me some books to read with cool stories, manly stories from, the Wild West. And that's where it started. And then I had an uncle living nearby, and he would read a book and then just get rid of it. He didn't keep any of his books. And he was reading Tom Clancy books, which just great books. And so he passed them on. And I remember he handed it to me. It was huge, man. I was like, how, small print, no pictures, massive book. How am I supposed to read this? And I remember thinking like that. But that's where it started. So I really started hitting books when I was 12 years old. And then when I moved out at 16, I really leaned into reading because I was desperate. I was desperate to have knowledge. I was desperate for information. I was desperate for the secrets to happiness and success. And I just started devouring books, and then more and more and more. And now for over 2 decades, I've averaged at least a book a week.
I am curious about something. You said that you started reading books to unlock the secrets to an extraordinary life. You said roughly that. What made you assume there was such knowledge in books anyways?
I guess I was hoping initially, because I observed, my family growing up was dysfunctional as a mess. And so we, marriage and divorce and fighting, and I moved out, and then I moved into really poor areas. And, we're a rough part of town, and people had just broken relationships and broken lives and just really suffering and miserable. But I would capture glimpses of people as you're just out in life. I would notice some wealthy people and some people that at least looked happy. And it seemed like they had good marriages and good relationship with their kids, and they seemed like they enjoyed their life. And so initially it was just like, I want to see if it's actually for real. I'm just hoping. I hope there is a way that some people are genuinely happy and successful. And if there is a formula, if there's a way, I'm going to find it. And I had that gritty commitment because I hated suffering. I hated being lonely. I hated not having relationships. In fact, I hated my life. And at some points even hated myself. But I was like, look, if it's possible, I'm going to figure it out. Interestingly, just today, right now, I just got another message from this guy. And he just said, he said, look, happy marriages don't exist. They're not even possible. And I responded, I said, well, I have a genuinely phenomenal marriage. We've been married 23 years. My marriage is incredible. And he wrote back and he's like, well, I'm happy for you, but all I see and all I have seen and all that I've experienced is that marriages are just miserable and they're suffering and they're sexless. Like they don't exist. And this guy, he has conviction and belief that happy marriages don't even exist, or at least they can't for him. And it's not the first time I've received messages like that. And so it's easy to slip into this, nope, it can't happen because I tried it and it didn't work. But I didn't want to settle for that. I said, look, if it's possible, I'm going to do everything in my power to create it for myself, to do life on my terms. And I figured I had read some good books and they had helped me. So I figured books were the way to go.
What would you say you have learned that is not well known, but absolutely should be? Like, what's something that is borderline criminal that people don't know?
Ooh, that's a good question. So Stephen Covey pointed out, to know and not to do is really not to know. So what I'm about to say, we might think, well, most people know that, or that's common sense, or at least a lot of people know that. But because most people don't do it, I'm going to operate on this principle that actually most people don't really know it or don't understand it. And it's this idea that we have the power and ability to do life on our own terms. And that at any point, we can change directions. We may not be able to change destinations overnight, but 100% we can change direction overnight. We can do it immediately. And it starts by changing our attitude of mind, changing our thinking patterns. And literally, and I've done this, I've helped other people do it. That's what I do with the transformational coaching that I get to do. Changing one idea, one belief, one mindset can alter the course of your life for the better or for the worse, actually. It works both ways. But if we can alter what we think and believe, the inner dialogue, then we can literally create life on our terms. And I don't think most people know that. And I don't think they believe it or understand it. But truly, genuinely, we can write our own life stories and we can create massive transformations if we will. It doesn't matter where we were born, where we came from, what we're experiencing. Like our current circumstances are kind of unimportant. Well, George Bernard Shaw said it this way. He said, people are always blaming their circumstances. He says, I don't believe in circumstance because the men and women who get on in this life are the ones who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they cannot find them, they make them. And it's that core belief that we can create and make our own circumstances and build life the way we want on our terms.
Yeah. You've said that to me in the past, but I heard it a different way that put it in terms so concrete to me that I thought, well, it has to be true. And although some philosophers disagree, it's this idea of cause and effect. Every cause in your life has an effect. So if you put in these positive causes that you know will bring about effects that you desire, then those effects will come about. Yep. It's a law of nature.
Exactly. It's the law of the harvest, and it's the law of karma. Now, how it gets there might not always be as direct as we think. There's often very indirect ways that God and the universe are conspiring in our favors, but you're absolutely right. There is a cause and there is an effect.
Reality has too much complexity to be able to perfectly predict what will occur. Right. But we do know that it follows certain laws.
Yeah. Well, there's another law too, the law of serendipity, where, the way I like to define it and the way I've experienced in my life is when you're pursuing something good and you, through good fortune, through God and his universe conspiring in your favor, you're pursuing something good and you find something even better, something unanticipated, something perhaps you didn't even know existed. But because you were on the move towards good things, you very often end up finding even better things.
I noticed something interesting. some of the language you've been using throughout this interview since the beginning. You've been talking about a lot about narrative or writing the story of your life, for example.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting that narrative has this sort of resonance with the way humans think.
Yep.
Do you have any ideas as to why that might be?
Well, it's because I don't pretend to understand like the deep inner workings of, many decades or millennia of humankind. But I do know through studying history and traveling extensively through 60 some odd countries, just working with people across 5 continents, like we are drawn to stories. I think because we're living a story, we're in a story. And ideally we should be the hero of our own stories, but very often we're the villain of our own stories, or somehow we're trying to be passive participants. We're trying to be spectators in our own life story. And because our life is a story, and the story of humanity is a story, obviously, and what we're watching play out is the drama of life, from economies and romances and wars and our own conflict. Like everything is a story. And Joseph Campbell spelled it out so well with the hero's journey. But we're living a story, so we're drawn to story. And I think most of us could take a far more active role in creating that story, not just thinking that we are participants in it, that we're being acted upon and there's not much we can do. We were handed a role and we just have to do it and deal with it and accept it. I think that's one of the greatest lies we've been fed, and that most people believe, that, life's just been handed to you, that like whatever you are stuck with, you're stuck with. And that's just not true. We get handed all kinds of garbage, but we don't have to keep it. We don't have to keep going down the path that somebody else put us on. We can stop at any moment and go a different direction.
I'd say it's probably not that we think in terms of stories, so to speak, but more that the story is a reflection of the human journey with all the fluff pulled out. Because if you tell a story enough times, the unimportant details get lost, and eventually you get left with the essence of the human journey. And I think maybe that's why. Narrative speaks to us so deeply.
It is. It's the human journey. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of stories, let's go back to the beginning of yours. What was the first book you ever read that really changed the way you see the world?
Sure. So I read some of those storybooks for tweens or teens, and I remember resonating with some heroes, and really, the hero of the story was a tough, manly guy back in the Western frontier. And I remember like, yeah, that guy's awesome. That guy's tough. I mean, he can't be killed. He can't be beat. He won't give up. And I remember those inklings. But then I would say, one of the first couple of books, the personal development books that really, really hit home were The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Well, and The Hiding Place by Corey ten Boom. So those were ones that I read when I was 16, 17 out on my own. And a couple of those were given to me. I found one of them, but those authors became my first mentors. And it really, really hit home because it really mattered. I was desperate. I was hungry for knowledge and truth and information. I needed help. I was shy. I was insecure. I was struggling, man, just limping along, feeling hopeless and helpless. And having them mentor me through their stories and their principles and their lessons, and then, having the courage to give it a try, to experiment with what they were saying and getting the results, that became very transformative for me. And those first few books really lit fire that then has now been a big stack of books that have totally transformed my life.
And you kept going, you kept reading, you kept adding to it.
Yep. Never stopped. So I'm constantly reading or listening to 4 or 5 different books at a time. and have for many years.
Yeah, it's a sort of a permanent increase in ability, because that knowledge will, well, barring some kind of neurological disease or serious injury, will stay with you for the rest of your life.
Yep, exactly. Every book you read becomes a part of who you are and how you think. It's your makeup. So we got to be really careful what we're consuming, right? Because what you input determines output. So what you put in is what you get out, and what you read, what you watch, what you listen to, it's who you become. And the same is true for the people you spend the most time with. You end up going where they're going and doing what they're doing. So we all could be far, far more deliberate and intentional and careful and vigilant with what we're allowing to go in our mind, because a lot of it's going in there and it's staying there, and it's creating those neural pathways that then, lead to the habits we have for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. I think that kind of ties into free will a little bit. This is something that's discussed quite a bit among philosophers. But essentially, there are the two camps, the free will camp and the determinist camp. I mean, there is compatibilism, but essentially, the determinist camp says that everything we think or do, anything at all, is the result of certain causes. And those can be biological, for example, if you're hungry, thirsty, tired, genetic, essentially our genetic predispositions, individual to all of us. And then what I call the experiential environment, which is essentially the information, all the total sum of the information you've accumulated throughout your life. So that can be through experiences, through learning about it. And the idea is that everything from that, everything I stated previously, it kind of amalgamates to create the thoughts and actions you have in the moment. So that would definitely, if that's true, it would definitely be important to curate what kind of information you put into your mind, because that will directly determine the thoughts and actions you have. Because, for example, if you have an idea, that idea arises directly from the ideas you've put into your mind previously.
Yep. And your experiences, your input for all the years of your life. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. When would you say you shifted from, well, first of all, let's go back to when you were alone at 16. What was the defining moment where you realized, I have to do something?
I think it was probably Christmas Eve. 16 years old, and we were living in a bad part of town, a little shack of a house, and it was freezing. We didn't even have adequate heat. The room I was staying in was maybe 4 feet wide and 8 feet long, and had a little bed in there, a little dresser. And on Christmas Eve, I was just sitting there by myself, wrapped up in a couple, thin blankets. I could see my freezing breath in the air. And I was sitting alone on Christmas Eve. And to me, what I wanted and what I'd had as a child is, Christmas Eve, you have a big meal, and you're with your friends and your family, and you're, maybe, opening some presents or anticipation of opening some presents. And it's supposed to be warm and wonderful and happy, and all the lights and the decorations and everybody gathering around. And I was just sitting there by myself. And, just like, this sucks. This really, really sucks. And I want to do whatever I can, whatever has to be done to make sure this never happens again, so that I'm never alone again. Because it was Christmas Eve, Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday was in a close succession. And so those hit pretty hard, because I was just alone during that time in the winter. I'm like, I'm done, man. Of all the things I suffered, loneliness was the worst. And so I said, I'm going to do whatever I have to do. I'm going to become whoever I have to become, so this never happens to me again, and definitely never, ever happens to my children. And, I was hoping to be married and have children and a family. And I'm like, in the future, I'm not going to live like this. I'm going to do things differently. And I ended up having, that night was tough, but I ended up having a really special spiritual experience. I really did some praying, and I just I felt God's love for me, genuinely. Like, it was special. I felt like he just wrapped me in his arms in love and gave me this big spiritual hug that night. It was very comforting and very powerful. So it became a pivotal moment that was reinforcing things I already wanted and desired, but it kind of cemented this commitment. Because there's a big difference, brother, between wanting something or even the wishfulness we often have, oh, I wish I could have that, or I wish I could do that. Everybody's got that, this wishy-washy wishing, this wishfulness. And then there's deep desire. There's empty wishes and deep, solid desire and commitment. And when we commit to do what must be done to get the result we want, a transformation takes place in us. And then at some point, especially if we're truly committed, at some point we become unstoppable. Not that we know what we're going to do already or know how to do it already, but that we're committed to figuring out how to make it happen. So the commitment in many ways comes first. Say, you know what? I'm going to make this happen. I'm either going to find a way or I'm going to make one. That's an ancient quote that I adopted as my own belief. I'm either going to find a way or I'm going to make one. And when you commit at that level, you're going to do whatever it takes to make it happen. And that's when you get the results you want.
Yeah. I've heard some people say that desperation is necessary to build that desire. That if you don't even have a little bit of desperation or something truly compelling you, that the desire won't arise. What do you think of that?
Man, it was true for me. I don't know if it's true for everybody. Man, it was true for me. And I've seen, the way I like to frame it up is that where there's pain, there's power. And we often want to avoid pain. And we want to keep pain away from our children and the people we love. But truly, where there's pain, there's power. And in that context, where there's desperation, there's drive.
Yes, 100%. I don't think anybody has a justification not to be desperate. For me, the desperation comes from simply the reminder that I am on my way to my grave. I'm dying every single day. Time is limited and it only gets shorter.
Mm-hmm. And you never get it back.
That thought doesn't allow me to just do nothing or let things happen.
Today is all you get. It's easy to forget, man. We get thinking about what we're going to do for dinner and what so-and-so said and did and what's happening in politics and the weather and what I'm going to do for work and how I'm going to decorate and oh, shoot, I need a new pair of shoes. And we get caught up in all this stuff and we forget that we have this precious, precious day of life that we never get again. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yes. Short-sightedness is far more natural to man because it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that we would have overemphasized what was immediate because at the end of the day, the future doesn't matter if you're dead.
Right, exactly. But now we need to discipline ourselves to be present in the present and still have thoughtful consideration for what's coming and who we want to be in the future.
Yes, because in the present environment, we have, thankfully, the cognitive ability to realize that we have a future. And also, with the way the world is currently, there's a very, very good chance you make it to old age. And so that person at that point is still going to be you. That's the way I see it, at least. You're going to be you all the way until you die. So you might as well at least take into account that future you.
Yeah, exactly. And be the very best version of myself and realize that the future version better be the better version. And he's going to look back on who I am and what I did. I think there's going to be a very real moment of reckoning where somehow the person you are is going to have the chance to meet, so to speak, the person you might have become. And when that moment happens, I want to be that man. I want to have maximized my potential. And for me, the only way to do that is to make that a reality is to just keep growing every single day to make some improvement to my life. And in fact, that's a very fulfilling and meaningful and enjoyable life. I love my life. And I'm doing something every single day to grow and improve.
You gave two ideas there that were somewhat metaphorical, it seemed. And one was the idea of being your best self. And I think, well, think about it. What's the alternative? Not being your best self, being a lesser version of what you could be. I mean, it doesn't seem like a very good alternative to me. And then also this idea of reckoning with yourself in the future. Well, that's deathbed clarity, is it not?
Yep.
Well, if you're unlucky enough to not have a moment of clarity before your deathbed, you reckon with what could have been and your regret.
Yep. 100%. And hopefully we have those experiences a long time before we get to the end. Because if we wait until we get to the end, there's a book called The Death of Ivan Illich. And in it, he's on a premature deathbed because he fell off a ladder because he was doing things he really didn't want to do. And he went along, checking the boxes of social expectations. And then in agony as he's dying, he screams out, "What if my whole life has been wrong?" And we need to read books like that. We need to contemplate that and realize, no, that's not how I want to live. I'm not going to wait to the end of my life and then look back and say, well, how did I do? I'm going to stop often, regularly, and say, how am I doing? If I died now, would I be okay with what I've done? If I look back on this moment from my deathbed, am I going to be satisfied, fulfilled, content with who I've become and what I've spent my time and effort and energy and resources doing? So I think we need to do that all the time and ask ourselves, where we're at. And here's something super fascinating. I think it's true for all people, but especially true for men. We have this inner knowing. We kind of know what we're capable of. And if we're living below what we know we're capable of, it tears us up inside. It beats us up. And it's so hard, if not impossible, to have confidence and competence and drive and the ability to achieve big goals and dreams if we're just wallowing in self-pity and self-loathing because we know we're living below our own capabilities.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, this life we have, our brief human existence, is all really that is guaranteed. So the way I see it, that's the question of meaning. What brings meaning to life? That's a really difficult question, but the way I see it is, well, without humans, would there be meaning to things? And I think the answer is, well, no. A rock doesn't have meaning. The dog doesn't necessarily intrinsically have meaning. I think meaning is more a creation of the human mind. And because of that, I don't know if it's entirely subjective. I assume there are some objective properties to meaning. Since we're all humans, we're all the same organisms. So we have a lot of commonalities. And then there's some subjectivity to the way we think and experience life. So, I want to find out the properties of meaning, objective and subjective, and then try to incorporate those as much as you can into your life. Make the most of your existence. As far as I'm concerned, since this is all we're guaranteed to have, it's a sort of duty that we have to ourselves. Because what else are you going to do anyways? I'm curious what you think about meaning.
This whole idea just fascinates me. I think about it all the time, especially because I love to read, and I'm constantly reading about biographies and autobiographies and reading through history and people who have lived lives across time and space. And I'm just constantly baffled by this idea of that was it, man. That was your shot at mortal life. That was your shot at this existence. And you either lived well or you just squandered it away in some trivial pursuit that either you were confused or you thought was important and just you wasted away your life. So I'm with you, brother. I think we have to pursue meaning. What's interesting is that ultimately in life, things only have the meaning that you and I give them. We have that ability to interpret and place meaning. I think there are some common denominators. I believe there is intrinsic meaning and value in life. There's a philosophy called absurdism that claims that life has no inherent meaning. And then really it's kind of related to the nihilism that nothing really matters and everything is relative. I believe there is meaning in life. I really do, truly do. And I think books like Man's Search for Meaning talk about that, but I think it's we feel it too. It makes sense to us. Relationships, especially if we become good at relationships. If we suck at relationships, then they're not going to feel really meaningful. They're just going to feel miserable. And you're like, no, that's not the meaning of life. This is horrible. But ultimately it's because we suck at relationships. If I'm terrible in relationships like I used to be, and I have hard time having friends or hard time being in a romantic relationship or hard time connecting with my own children, then I'm not going to feel like relationships have that much meaning or they're the meaning of life. But when we learn how to have great relationships, how to truly get along with people, how to deeply connect and really love, allow our hearts to grow and expand and really love, then we find meaning. And I think perhaps some of the deepest meaning is in those relationships, those connections, and who we choose and get to spend time with in this life. And I also, I've alluded to it already, talked about it, but I also feel like one of the greatest meanings in life, or where we find the most meaning in life, is in becoming our best self. I really believe we're here on this earth to become the very best version of ourselves. We're here to grow. We're here to learn. We're here to improve. And I plan on growing and learning and improving my entire life, and having the people I love right alongside me. And in those two things, and I'll give a third, making a positive difference, like having impact, making a contribution, doing something beyond yourself. You're not just here for your own benefit, your own enjoyment, just to amass more things. Like, you're here to make a difference. So with those three things, like making the most of yourself, which is the best thing you can do for God and for humanity and yourself, doing it with people you really love and truly, truly love them, like committing your life to them and becoming a phenomenal person so you're easy to live with and easy to love and hard to kill. And then contributing, making a difference in the world. If you do those three things and you do them well, oh man, that's a life of real meaning right there.
And I don't think that's abstract. It seems, well, we agree fundamentally. It seems that you're saying that that these things are sort of intrinsic. They have intrinsic meaning to life. Would you say that's an accurate representation of what you said?
Yeah, and the way we test those things is like, well, let's go look around. Let's go across cultures. Let's go across time. Let's read ancient records. Let's go through different traditions and different religions and different countries and backgrounds and customs. Let's go look. Let's go see. Let's test our ideas. And in the 60 some odd countries I've traveled through extensively, and many religions, many traditions, many places, the reading and studying I've done across time and space, realize like, yeah, those are pretty solid common denominators for meaning in life. And the greatest teachers and philosophers and prophets of all time have talked on those things. And humans are drawn to growth and development. We're literally hardwired for it. Like, creation made it so that we're hardwired for growth and improvement. And then we always want to be with others, right? Human beings are social creatures. And then when we contribute and give back and do good, it makes us feel phenomenal. So we're literally in a very physiological and biological way, we're wired for those things, but in a spiritual, like, because we're all spiritual beings, in a spiritual way as well, like it just works. It's like, those are the things that bring joy and happiness and goodness into life.
I find it interesting that, well, you and I come at it from very different perspectives, but I think a good litmus test for an idea as to whether or not it's correct is if you come at it from various different angles and come to a similar or the same conclusion. I come at it from a far more secular perspective than yourself, and you come at it also from a very people-centric perspective. You go and look at other cultures. You look at ancient texts, philosophers. I have looked into philosophy a bit, but I find to be a very compelling explanation to find a biological basis for these things. And it makes sense because we've been, over the course of a very long time, wired to be highly social. We are very, very social creatures. And so that idea of relationships having intrinsic meaning makes complete sense to me, because over the course of hundreds of millions of years, we've had relationships wired into us. I don't know if you're familiar with the study. I don't remember the details, unfortunately, but in essence, the idea is that they had groups of babies. They had one group of babies that had normal attachment, normal socialization, and then another group that was largely isolated. And they had to cut the study short because the isolated group, the group without any sort of social interaction, half of them died. Mm-hmm. Even though they had food, water, they had all their biological necessities met, but they just started dying without interaction.
You're right. If you study sociology, you study biology, and in this case, you study spirituality, those factors appear in all three of those disciplines.
Mm-hmm. And same with the idea of pursuing, essentially becoming your best self. I don't know if it has to necessarily be your best self, although I don't really see much of a better alternative. What else are you going to do with your life anyways?
Right.
Aside from try to make it better, right? But this idea of pursuit ties in directly into how the dopaminergic system works.
Yep, exactly. And psychologists have found that people have, like all people, have this idea of a best self. Somehow human beings have the mental capacity to envision a best self. There's this beacon in there, this homing device that draws us upward. It's powerful.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I actually, you've heard me say so many times. I love to say, reach upward, reach upward, reach upward, and it comes from the last part of a poem by Harry Kemp. And he said, "Chief of all thy wondrous works, supreme of all thy plan, thou hast placed an upward reach into the heart of man." And there is an upward reach in us. And I think it's spiritual, I think it's divine, but it's also biological and it very well could be evolutionary as well. But regardless, human beings have an upward reach. There's something in us that compels us to want to improve ourselves, to improve our circumstances, to improve the world. There's a drive for improvement. And it's a powerful, powerful force in nature and particularly in human beings.
Yeah. And same with this idea of helping people and making the world a better place. I think there is also an objective basis for that. There are many people have speculated on why this would be, and I'm not entirely sure, but it seems that we're wired for altruistic, pro-social behavior. Certainly feels good to give to people.
Yeah, you find, and no, there's plenty of people who don't, right? They want to live their life and they only think about themselves and they go and do their thing and whatever. But by and large, man, it feels good. And people acknowledge that when they start seeking to do things beyond their own self-interest. And when they make a contribution that makes a difference in somebody else's life, there's a transformation that happens in their own mind and in their own heart.
Let's go back to your story. You were talking about how you were alone at 16 on Christmas Eve, and you began to read those books, and they began to change the way you see the world. You saw the world through the perspectives of other people and not just the one you were stuck in. Where did you go from there?
Well, one, I changed my my own paradigm because I read The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. It's a Christian family living in Haarlem in the Netherlands, and they decide to start hiding Jews who are being persecuted by the Nazis. And so they build this secret room at the top of their home, and they end up saving hundreds of lives. But then their neighbors turn them in, and they get caught, and everyone in the family dies except Corrie, who ends up writing the book. And there's a beautiful family that are worthy of being heroes to all of us. But they suffer, man. They suffer tremendously. And they suffer because they chose to do good, and they got in trouble for it. They could have not participated. They could have just kept to themselves and not helped. But, in their family, they're like, that's not even an option. It's not an option to not help, which is pretty awesome. And so because they chose to help, they ended up suffering horrendously. And as I read their story, I realized, wow, man, if I thought I had problems, my problems are nothing. My tough circumstances and situations are nothing compared to the suffering that was going on in these concentration camps. And right there, I was able to create a mental juxtaposition, right? And this contrast that became so helpful for me to change my own paradigm, my own perspective of my own challenges, and to put them in perspective, and to realize that most of my problems, even, they felt big, they were mostly Mickey Mouse problems. They were pretty insignificant. And it gave me the attitude and power and perspective to start creating changes. So I stopped complaining. I stopped whining. I stopped throwing the pity parties. And I started looking for things that I could do. I started looking for solutions to my problems instead of just wallowing in my problems.
You started off with health largely, didn't you?
Yep.
At least that's how you had me start in making my life better. You told me a good place to start was to take care of your vessel.
Yep. It really is. And that's why I work with everybody. Almost everyone comes to me and says, okay, let's just start with your body. That is the most fundamental place to start because it's your vehicle for everything else you do. And so it's the filter for everything else you do. And when you start taking care of your body, which includes your brain, then everything else gets better because you're in a better condition to show up for everything else.
Absolutely. And I think easy proof of this is simply to go one night without sleep. See how you feel the next day.
Yeah, exactly.
How you treat your body immediately and directly affects everything.
Exactly. You're going to feel it right away, immediately. We've all done that. We felt it in the lack of sleep and junk food or no food, and you feel it immediately. So what if we're doing that chronically and we become unaware of it? Then we're just limping along and struggling and things are way harder than they should be. It's very often just because our body's not in a great condition.
What brought this to your attention early on? I assume you didn't start off taking care of yourself, did you?
There was no, it wasn't cognitive choice. It wasn't wisdom or any knowledge. I'm like, so we grew up eating just massive amounts of junk food and garbage. I was surprised I lived into adulthood with the way we ate as a kid. But my outlet for my frustration and boredom was to go to the gym and hit a boxing bag or try to lift weights. And that became my lifeline. Without knowing what I was doing, it became my therapy, my lifeline, and my transformation. And I was bored. I was angry. Man, I was super angry. I had a crazy temper. And so lifting weights and martial arts was a phenomenal outlet for me. And so I went after it, right? And I just kept doing it. Well, of course, it helped in every way. It helped physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, and of course, later on financially even. It just makes all the difference when you get your body into peak health and you keep it there and make it a priority. Man, it is a great way to live life, and it makes all the other things easier and better.
Well, yes, of course, because the entirety of experience arises from your brain, and your brain sits in the environment of your body.
Yep.
So it makes perfect sense. It is, at the end of the day, you. That is you.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are certain things that you can do to make yourself run better.
Yep. Hard to overstate how important it is to make sure we are enjoying optimal health.
So you start taking care of your health. You start to read and learn and all these things. When did your life really start to pick up?
Things started to get incrementally better, but I think the biggest shift is when I overcame my social anxieties and fears, my own inhibitions and obstacles. I was so timid and so afraid and insecure, and I getting physically fit and quite muscular helped. Reading tons of books helped. But finally, I just had to lean into the discomfort, the social discomfort, and really start connecting with people and start making friends. And it feels like that's when things picked up pace and started getting significantly better. That, I can't pinpoint it, but at some point, I finally had some friends. And I was fit and healthy, and I was reading lots of great books. And so I felt inspired and energized and motivated. I felt confident. I felt optimistic. I was choosing to have a great attitude no matter what was going on. And then there were, so things felt great. And I was teaching and I loved sharing what I was learning, because I would try something. I was like, man, that totally changed my life. And I'd share it with other people, because they're like, oh, I'm struggling with this. I'm like, yeah, I did too. Try this. And I loved that. So I became a teacher and a speaker, and I leaned right into that. And so things were going great there, but I still hadn't figured out the financial piece because I was stuck with so much scarcity and a real scarcity mindset. And I just lived in poverty. And that went on for years. years after I even had made those other changes. And so, I had great relationships, great health. I was on a great spiritual journey, and mentally, emotionally, things were fantastic. And I was making enough to survive, to get by. But I realized I had some real financial limiters. And that took a lot of time to break through those barriers and recreate a mindset and philosophy around finances and money and abundance, and then to learn how to create the value inside the marketplace to make that happen. So it was a big, long, much longer transition than the other ones. And I think I worked harder on the other ones than I did on the financial one. I had kind of just settled into just being and doing life and helping out and doing other things. And so I didn't put in the intensity on the financial side of things. And I feel like it was a bigger barrier to overcome the scarcity I had. But then that was like another leap forward. So if you look back at the spectrum of my life, you'd see these leaps forward and upward, and then maybe a plateau, and then another leap, and then just kind of the incremental growth with these bursts that really made significant differences in the story of my life.
Where did those bursts come from? What brought them about? Do you know?
I think, well, like we already talked about, there was some desperation, there was some pain, there was some deep desires, like really wanting things to be different or better. Because, okay, if there's one thing we've done well in our family is to dream big. I have this acronym for DUMB goals. They have to be demanding, unrealistic, meaningful, and bold. And setting dumb goals and having big dreams and feeling the pains of failures and mistakes and the inability to do things like, oh, I hate that. And so it drove me to learn. And it wasn't like, hey, there are books that are so powerful that you read the book and you're different from then on out. Like that book is this pivotal moment that changes things. But it often takes 5 or 6 or 10 more books in the same genre to really cement it into where it actually becomes an integral part of you. And then you have to back it up with your actions. And so it's like, it's this journey of like, oh yeah, now I know, but then I have to figure out how to do what I know. And most people still struggle with that. It's just hard to do what you know you should be doing, which is why, the coaching, which I get to do, I get to coach great men and women all day, every day. That's what I get to do. It's awesome. But that's why coaching is so powerful, because it's the accountability and the inspiration and helping us do what we know. And so it was a journey for me to get there. And so, but it's all the puzzle pieces, right? You can't pinpoint one thing. It was the accumulation of those things that ultimately made the biggest difference.
Yeah. As the first book that you recommended to me said, The Slight Edge, there is no such thing as a quantum leap. It's all consistency. Small actions repeated day in and day out.
Love it. Which I think what ends up happening with those is you go along and it's an exponential curve. Sometimes it's a linear curve, but I feel like there are exponential curves in there where you're going along and it seems the same. You're like, I'm doing this, he's doing that, we're just about the same. And then there's a moment where it's the exponential curve up or the exponential curve down, depending on your habits and behaviors, what you're doing day in and day out. And I would say there are quantum leaps, but most of the time it looks like a very slight linear curve where you're just plugging along, doing the things that you realize like, no, if I do this consistently, I'll get the results. And then you just feel, well, it's like the book Mastery. So you're going along and then you have this burst upwards and then kind of levels off for a little while and then another burst and you level off and another burst. Or the exponential curve, you're going along and then it pops up, whether it's mental or emotional or physical or social or spiritual or financial, whatever it is, you'll have this leap forward. So I feel like for me at least, it's been a combination that there are exponential, there's an exponential curve and quantum leaps occasionally, but then most of the time it looks like the linear curve where you're working on it day in and day out and you keep working until you have another burst of growth or improvement.
It's the overnight success that took 10 years to get to.
Exactly. Yep.
You mentioned that you began to succeed socially and financially. Well, let's go back to socially, because I think it's worth emphasizing that you were cripplingly shy. You couldn't even look people in the eyes, right?
Yeah. I was 17 years old. I remember I just couldn't look a person in the eye. And there was a gentleman, he would come around and he would say, hey, Greg, you got to look people in the eye when you're talking to them. And I remember trying so hard. I'd look up, he'd say that. He's like, look me in the eye, look at his eye. And I'd be like, man, he's still looking at me. And so I'd look away. He's like, no, look at me. I'm like, this is so awkward and uncomfortable. And I was uncomfortable with it. And I had to, I think ultimately it's because of my own insecurities. Which is, it's interesting to think about. It's worth thinking about for a while. But it's what I believed about myself. And it was the dialogue I was having, what I was saying about myself and what I would say to others about myself. But ultimately, when my beliefs about myself changed, then I was able to keep my head up and look people in the eye. And interestingly as well is when my interest in them draws me to look in their eyes. That curiosity and the love for humanity. So when I was able to overcome my own weaknesses and insecurities and fears, then I was able to show up more and be more friendly and more interested in others and start building those friendships. And now, that's what I love to do. I love connecting with human beings all over the world and having meaningful conversations. In fact, ultimately I came to have my own definition for social leadership is to have a meaningful conversation with anyone, anywhere, at any time. And that is challenging and difficult to do. But it's also very rewarding and meaningful and fun. It's just fun to connect with human beings all over the world.
I think that's worth emphasizing that you said being interested. Frankly, I think it's like a sort of supercharge to your social interactions. And really, people are extremely interesting. It's like a world to be explored. I see books the same way. Books and people. There's a world of information to be explored in there. You have no idea what's going on.
Exactly.
Especially when you go around the world, as you have.
Yeah, but you got to be willing to get out of yourself and get out of your own interest, out of your own. I think in a way we're just constantly looking at ourselves and we're looking, well, how does this affect me? And what about me? And what do I want to do? And what am I doing? And what's my plan? And me, my life. And if we'll just stop for a second and be like, wow, what's it like for this person to live in this place and to grow up here and to have this culture or this religion or this tradition or this location? What? Wow. Why are they so interested in this? Why do they like that? Why do they hate this? What makes them tick? What makes them think the way they do and believe what they believe? And why are they doing these things? Like if you just really get interested outwardly, it's fun and it is fascinating.
One of those that you mentioned that I find very, very interesting is figuring out people's motivations. Why do you do what you do? And so I want to flip that on you. Why do you do what you do?
I think it was the pain was a big motivator early on of being lonely, of feeling hopeless and helpless, feeling uninspired and unmotivated, feeling desperate and beaten down. So on one side, it's pain on one side. Well, okay, all human beings, we avoid pain and we pursue pleasure. That is the human experience. The brain is wired for that. So of course, the pain I experienced in the past drives me to have great relationships and live a great life and have people around me and have nice things around and just live a life that's fun and exciting and engaging and meaningful. And then I'm pursuing the pleasure of good feelings. It feels good to do good. And my drive is to be a great force for good in the world. That's what drives me. That's why I do what I do. I want to be a great force for good in the world, starting in my own home. I want to have an absolutely extraordinary marriage, and we do. I want to have a phenomenal relationship with each of our 7 children, and I do. And I want to live a great, exciting life with big goals and dreams as a family, and we're doing that. and I want to make a real difference. And so every day I try to get up and do something that's good for other people.
Yeah. It doesn't take too long reading into the psychological literature to realize that a person's childhood plays a very, very big part of their life. And it just seems crazy to me that somebody would go into parenting without having any idea how to be a parent, right? We talk about this all the time.
Yeah, it's wild.
It seems insane to me.
But we do it. We just do so many things unconsciously. We're just rolling along and we look around and we see other people doing stuff and like, well, I guess when it comes along, we'll deal with it. And I think most people are operating on the hope strategy. But hope's not a strategy. Right? They hope it works out. Like, well, it'll figure it out. Well, other people figure it out. We'll always make it work out. And I hope it works. But hope is a crap strategy. It just doesn't work. And we don't realize that everything we do requires a specific set of skills. And being a good person is not good enough. I don't know how to emphasize that strongly enough. Being a good person is not good enough. Because if all you had to do was to be a good person, then every good person would be healthy and wealthy and have great marriages and awesome kids and everything would turn out fantastic and it would be amazing. And there are a lot of good people in the world. But the reality is it requires very specific skills, marriage skills, in order to have a great marriage. It requires very specific skills in parenting in order to be good at parenting. It requires very specific skills to succeed in the marketplace and in business. And so we can be a good person and utterly fail in lots of aspects of life simply because we lack the skills. We've reached the current limitation of our skill set. And so we have to lean into each area of life seeking very specific skills to add to our goodness. But being good won't cut it. It's not enough. It's important. It's crazy important. Be a genuinely good person, but then get the skills to succeed in each important area of your life.
That somewhat goes back to the idea of cause and effect that we were talking about earlier. Being a good person, the cause, will bring you the effects of what being a good person brings. So, well, firstly, it would make you good. Secondly, you may reap some of the social benefits of being a good person. People know you're good. You have a good reputation, for example. But any effects that are not related causally to being a good person just won't occur. Like health. Yep. Completely divorced from how good you are.
Exactly. Yep. And even socially, you're right. There are going to be some social benefits, but I can seriously lack social skills and still be a good person. And so people notice like, you're a good person, but man, you're really awkward, or you talk too much, or you don't talk enough, or you don't pick up on social cues, and you're not really interested in other people. Like, so I could still socially just flop, even though I'm a good person. So goodness has a lot of great effects in life, but it has to be accompanied with skills.
100%. And again, those skills stay with you for the rest of your life. Yep. Absolute. The return is so disproportionate to the effort.
Yeah. It's amazing, huh? And we have to keep refining them and keep improving them and keep them sharp. But man, it's worth it. And you're right.
We don't have to keep refining them and improving them, but if you're satisfied at being stuck where you are presently, well then, do as you please.
You'll keep getting the same results. Yep.
Yeah. What was it? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Who said that?
I don't know, but it's true.
Whoever said it was very wise, most likely.
Wherever we decide to kind of level off is where we condemn ourselves to our current state. So I'm always encouraging the people I work with to never level off, but keep leveling up. And it seems daunting. It seems tiring. It seems like so much work, but it's really not. And like you were mentioning earlier, the rewards far outweigh the effort. And we think sometimes, I think we lie to ourselves and think, well, if I coast a little bit here, things will be easier. But life is hard. It is brutal when you try to coast, because nobody ever coasted to the top. And if you start coasting, there's only one way you can coast, and that's down. And so trying to take it easy, trying to just drift along, roll through life, it might seem like it's going to be easier, but ultimately ends up being so much harder. You suffer so much more. And the effort you have to pay is in the consequences of mediocrity versus the effort you put up front in discipline to transcend mediocrity. And it's a very big difference. And for me, infinitely worth the effort up front to keep leveling up.
This ties back to the idea of every future iteration of you still being you. And I think the younger you are, the more time you have to live, the more important it is, because your actions in the present will affect the entirety of your life from right now until the day of your death. So I think it's even more critical when you're younger, because at least if you're older, well, you'd make that time better, but you'll be dead far sooner. Whereas for me, for example, I have probably a good 6, maybe even 7 decades to worry about.
True. That's awesome. And yet, yes, you're absolutely right. And yet, I believe, and I've seen it, I've experienced it myself, transformational change is so real and so palpable and so possible. We can make massive shifts and transformation in our lives. And from this point forward, everything else can be different.
Yeah, because we're the most cognitively malleable organisms there are. We have this astounding capacity for change. It's amazing, really. It's a gift.
I wish everyone knew that and realized it.
That's the unfortunate thing is, if somebody really doesn't, well, you could fault somebody for not changing if they know they can. But what really could you do if you don't even know there's something you could do in the first place?
Right.
What would you say to a person like that?
Well, that's what I was going to say is like one of the greatest messages we can share with anyone is this ability to change. Like, hey, you can transform your life. You can change directions. You can create different results. You do not have to stay where you are. It's one of the most powerful messages out there. And it needs to be shared with everyone.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I made this podcast. To share ideas that are really worth sharing. To talk to people who know a lot about life and who have lived a lot. And to learn what has gotten them to where they are. And what can the rest of us do?
Love it. What a great work, brother.
So you began your journey to maximizing your life at 13, learning from the mentors you found in the pages of those books. And I started my journey of doing the same at the age of 13. But the only reason I was able to start young, and frankly, probably the reason I started at all, was because of you. So I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for introducing me to this world. And actually, your podcast was the first podcast I ever really binged. I went through from episode 1 all the way to episode, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was around 140. So this feels like a passing of the baton here.
Wow. I love it. And kudos to you and honor that when you were introduced to it, you actually took action on it. You internalized it and acted on it. So again, honor and kudos to you, sir, for acting on it, because lots of people get introduced to it. Lots of people have the door opened up to them, or they're offered the opportunity, but well done for taking advantage of it. And if you keep doing that, it'll keep transforming your life.
I wonder how much of that was actually my fault and to my credit, and how much of it was chance. Maybe it's just because I'm competitive and I wanted to I like to win. So I wanted to win at life.
I love it.
And I'm also very curious. How much of that was me and how much of it was chance?
Right.
So I don't know. I don't think we can take too much credit for anything, really. Because again, it goes back to this idea of free will. How much of it is just the biologically predetermined things, as well as the information you have experienced over your life?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And how much of it is a choice and discipline? I think there's something there. I think there's something to be said of choosing and following through. There's an element of integrity, of character, of grit to say you're going to do something and do it. And yeah, there's some biology there, and there's some chance there, and there's a lot of factors. But there's something at least to be celebrated in saying, I'm going to do something and then doing it.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, even if there is no free will, even if it's all a result of biological processes, as well as the experiences and information we've consumed, the mere belief in free will alters the choices we make and the things we do. So at the end of the day, how else are you going to live anyways?
Yeah.
But as though you can make all these choices. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't entirely matter. It's only a philosophically interesting discussion.
But we do get to choose. So I
Absolutely.
guess that's a resounding message is choose greatness. Like your life will be what you make of it. So make those choices. Decide right now today the caliber of person you're going to be and the caliber of life you're going to live, and write it down and start making it your reality. Like you get to shape and write and create and mold your life the way you want it to be. Like it's powerful. It's so powerful. And we don't have to just go along and coast along and drift and let other people write our stories for us. We get to choose. And so be a proactive and active participant in your own life. Be the hero of your own story.
Make your own hero's journey.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. Before you go, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Let's say you get arrested and you get put in the Chateau d'If. And that's the prison island from the Count of Monte Cristo. What 3 books are you going to take? You're going to have to read them forever. So which 3 books are you taking and why?
Wow. Man, that's super hard. I just shared a post of 3 books I would recommend for mental and emotional strength and fortitude. It was As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and The Majesty of Calmness by William George Jordan. And while those are absolutely amazing, I'm not sure I would take those 3. I definitely would take Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. It's my favorite book. And I
knew you'd say that.
Yeah, good. I would take the Bible for sure. And I know I would need a book that would consistently remind me regardless of circumstances, no matter what's happening, to keep pursuing my own greatness, which really that's the message of the Count of Monte Cristo. While he's in the Chateau d'If, he meets the Abbe Faria, who, next door in the different cell, had spent those 11 years becoming much, much better instead of just sitting there rotting. And so a great reminder. I'm not sure what that third one would be. That's a great question. But I would say, of the 1,000+ books I've read, there's probably, if I went through my list, there's probably a good 75 to 100 just absolutely phenomenal books that are worth reading and rereading all the time, and just internalizing to get into your psyche and to make them a part of who you are and how you do life.
Where can people find that list?
My list? I created a list. It's free. So you can go to gregdenning.com or extraordinaryfamilylife.com. The lists are there. And I didn't put everything I've read. I just put, hey, this is the best stuff. And I kind of divided them into groups for business, for personal development, for marriage, for parenting, relationships, for personal transformation. And there's fantasy books and fiction books and self-help books and biographies and autobiographies and business books. We just need to be reading all the time. And reading is a phenomenal way to create change in our lives and to stay sharp, just constantly reminding ourselves of who we want to be and how to be that caliber of a person. So it's free. You can go get that on those websites.
Yeah, I'll definitely put those links in the show notes. Otherwise, where can people find you?
So my wife and I do a podcast together called the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. I do a podcast called the Be the Man Podcast. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Greg Denning. And then, of course, my websites. And I created a masterclass for men. So it's really designed for businessmen and entrepreneurs with families. We talk about marriage and parenting. We talk about health and fitness and family legacy and finances. And I lead a tribe of good men, great men who are striving to be their best selves. And so you can find that at bethemanmasterclass.com as well.
All right. Well, one final question. Who do you know that I should have a conversation with? Ideally, somebody, a scholar, someone who's learned and studied a subject a lot. Maybe somebody, a scientist or someone with scientific inclinations, a philosopher, Who do you know that I should have a conversation with?
Man, I've had either on our podcast or just conversations around the world, hikes, adventures. Man, I've had a ton of really great conversations with people all over the world, with from every walk of life, from special forces to science to philosophy. I think one person that you would really enjoy that I had on my podcast, and he's just a big thinker. He's so well read. And he's very thoughtful. His name's Gary Arnell. And he's just, man, I loved having him on my podcast and my show, because we walked through and talked about philosophy and society and what's happening right now, and in current events and past events and societies and civilizations. It was awesome. And he's a great thinker and reader. And he's a great guy to have conversations with like this. So these deep, meaningful conversations.
All right. Thank you very much for being on the show, Greg. And
Yep,
thank you for being my mentor.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, man.
Good job, brother. Proud of you.
The following is a preview of an episode you might enjoy. I'd like to start with one big, broad question. What is happiness?
If you go way back, 2,400 years, Aristotle was one of the great philosophers of the Western tradition. And he wrote a book on happiness. It's not equal to pleasure. Aristotle differentiated between happiness and pleasure. He said it's not pleasure.
Gary Arnell is a philosopher who has studied how best to live for individual and societal flourishing and happiness.
Aristotle taught that happiness, or the complete life, has 4 parts.
Please feel free to tell me in the comments if there's anything I could do better with this podcast. It's the best way for me to improve it. Finally, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed and hit the bell icon, because that gives this podcast more credibility and helps me to have more interesting guests on the show.